อ่ะมาแล้วเปลี่ยนโอเคเดี๋ยวนะลืมไปปิดเสียงเกมอยู่นี่หว่าโอเค
documentaries, but also in the case with fictional movies that are based off of the true crimes, Zodiac and Monster being just a few examples. But if you thought that Japan was this utopian society where the crime rate is low and everyone is well behaved, then you might be surprised, because even in this supposed utopian society of Nippon land, there have been some truly heinous crimes that have been committed and documented extensively, and for lack of the better words, I would argue, have been put in the spotlight just a little too much. And that certainly applies to the case that we're going to be talking about today, simply known as the murder of Furuta Junko, or more colloquially known as the Concrete Girl. I'm sure for some of you true crime connoisseurs out there, that name may have rung a bell, but for those of you who don't know, it is truly an understatement to say that this particular case has had its fair share in the spotlight. So much so that not only have we had an exploitative film and many books written about it, but for the purpose of this video, 2 whole manga series. God help us all. Why? Now, as much as I would like to go over and cover the books and the exploitation film, also, that noise. I'm already so much of a sissy that I can't handle gore films like Saw or Hostel, let alone a gore film, an exploitative gore film about a murder that really happened in Japan and honestly happened in a place that I used to live in. I'ma say no thanks to that one. Let alone the fact that I have already had my sanity drained out of me by the fact that I have had to sit down and read the 2 manga series that we are going to be talking about later in this video. So excuse me for wanting to hold on to little sanity I have left for just a little longer. But before we jump into the 2 manga series in question, I feel it's important for all of us watching this video right now to start on equal grounds in terms of what exactly the Furuta Junko case is all about and what exactly type of subject matter we are going to be dealing with. But let's be real, I'm not exactly the type of person who is cut out to talk about true crime stories, so instead I'm going to get my lovely assistant, Detective Aki, to tell you guys just very briefly about what kind of case this Furuta Junko murder case is all about.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Detective Aki, and you may know me from my On the Case series with myself, Detective Aki, where I take infamous crimes from Japan and urban legends and explain them in great detail. Now, in this video for Joey's channel, we're talking about the Junko Furuta case. If you've never heard of it, it is one of the most grotesque, most brutal, and most infamous crimes in Japanese history. Now, the details of what happened to Junko Furuta are actually so explicit that it's best safe for someone that's actually ready to read it on Wikipedia. But I will briefly break down the case so that everyone's on the same page.
สักครู่นะรู้สึกดังไปนิดนึง
Junko Furuta was a high school student that was liked by many of her peers. She had a part-time job, very high grades in school, and was expected to live a very successful future. But on November 25th, 1988, Junko Furuta was actually on her bike going back home. There were 4 teenage boys that spotted her and kicked her off her bike and fled the scene. They wanted to make it look like that they had just come to the scene and was offering to help her go back home. Unfortunately, this was the start of their plot to kidnap her and begin what is called the 44 Days of Hell. The 44 Days of Hell for Junko Furuta included torture, rape, and many other grotesque things that, again, I would suggest that you would just go read it online. When she was reported missing by her parents, the boys actually forced her to call her parents to tell them that she had run away and that she was safe with some friends. They even forced her to try and stop the police investigation looking for her. Now, there was a point of the investigation where the police did arrive at the boys' house where Junko Furuta was actually being kept, but the group insisted that they had no idea where she was, and the cops left. During the 44 Days of Hell, Junko was quite literally at the mercy of these 4 boys. Sometimes they would vent their anger by beating her, other times they would just beat her for the fun of it, and coming closer to the 44 Days of Hell, Junko Furuta eventually gave in to her wounds and died. Now, once the leader was notified by his brother that Junko had passed away, the 4 boys gathered together and dumped Junko's body into a barrel and filled it with concrete and hid it. Afterwards, another case was brought up that happened way before the kidnapping of Junko Furuta, and the police began their investigation by questioning questioning the boys. They were paranoid that Junko was the girl that they were looking for. They revealed the body location, which surprised the police considering this isn't the person that they were looking for in the first place. And the other woman from the original case was actually never closed. Now, as far as the prosecution goes, unfortunately these 4 boys are still walking around today because at the time of the Junko Furuta case, they were underage and many laws were protecting them. So they were released, but they were under a very heavy microscope under the government, and 3 out of 4 of the boys were arrested for other illegal activities once they turned 18. While they did serve some time, they were all eventually released and are still living and breathing today. In fact, in one of the cases regarding the illegal activities after Junko Furuta, one of them was actually boasting about what he had done to the girl. Another incident that happened was one of the boys' mother vandalized Junko's grave, blaming her for ruining her son's life. A funeral and memorial for Junko Furuta was taking place where all her high school classmates and her principal came, where she was gifted her high school diploma and buried with her school uniform. Her mother had a very severe mental breakdown in the court as the trial was going on, and there's no news about the father's whereabouts. Since then, the media has portrayed this case in exploitative films and manga.
Thanks, Detective Augie. So now that we're all on the same level of understanding, let's dive into the deep end. The first manga series we're going to be looking at is simply titled 17 sai, or 17 years old. This manga is told from the perspective of not the victim, but rather one of the culprits named Hiroki. He's not really the ringleader, but rather one of the many members who was responsible for doing unspeakable things to Junko, or Sachiko as she's called in the story. I guess this author wanted to try and respect the privacy of the real-life Furuta Junko by naming her Sachiko instead, but it's weird because everyone who starts reading this manga will soon very quickly realize that this is obviously influenced and is based upon the Furuta Junko story, so like what's the point? What you'll immediately start to realize about 17 sai is not only the fact that the story is told from the perspective of one of the culprits, but rather the fact that the story itself, including its conclusion, completely differs from the actual case. In the manga, Sachiko has a twin sister called Miki, who is out to look for and save her twin sister. Miki also plays into the story by
Okay. เคสของฟุรุตะจุนโกะก็น่าจะมีอยู่แค่นี้มั้ง Okay, on to the next topic. อะไรชินริเกียวมั้งอันนี้ใช่ไหม
オウム真理教は1987年朝原孫氏によって設立されました。私たちが目指すのは仏教の真理に基づき一人一人が幸福になることであり、最終的には目立つ悟りです。
グルを持たず一人で修行していたので、それこそ試行錯誤の連続だった。自分の修行に対する確信ができ、とても嬉しかったものだ。なぜならこれは経典上正しい修行によって身につく神通力とされていたからである。こんなにたくさんの弟子を指導すると言ったって一体どうやってと誰もが思うことだろう。しかしどんなに弟子が多くとも、またどんなに場所的に離れていたとしても、そんなことは何の問題にもならない。
本日朝原死刑囚をはじめとするオウム事件の死刑囚の執行が行われました。
Other techniques of mind control included hours of chanting and listening to tapes like this.
瞑想するぞ、瞑想するぞ、瞑想するぞ、瞑想するぞ、瞑想するぞ。
親と子と合わせない何が重要だ。
Actually stepping into it and fast. When I first came to Japan, I remember that first week of feeling overwhelming culture shock. I had always been interested and fascinated by Japanese culture from what I'd seen and what I read on the internet, but actually stepping into a new country and a new culture is always a completely different experience for everyone. From the train station rush hours to vending machines on every corner to thousands of years of tradition preserved that sometimes as a foreigner you feel like you have to keep up with just to fit in. And yeah, anime is also somewhere twined into all of that. But one thing that has just never escaped my mind is, where the fuck are all the trash cans? As bizarre as it seems, Japan is one of the cleanest countries in the world and yet also simultaneously has some of the least amount of public trash cans available. This is one of the most common concerns that you'll hear from people that have lived or stayed in Japan. It's actually asked so often that it's become an inside joke with everyone. If you've ever asked yourself this question, then a quick Google search will lead you to results that nearly all say the same thing. A domestic terrorism attack in 1995 where a Japanese cult released sarin gas in Tokyo's subway system. The attack was said to be the most serious attack upon Japan since World War II. The cult was named Om Shinrikyo, and the leader responsible was Shoko Asahara. I'm Detective Aki, and this is On the Case.
ดาเมจเยอะไปเดี๋ยว
Welcome to On the Case. This is a series that I do on this channel where I go over urban legends and cases in Japan and explain them in great detail. Now, some of you may have seen various YouTube videos talking about this case, but in this video, I'm going to be sharing footage from Japanese media outlets, visit locations of the crime, and unveil how a group went from a religious group loved by thousands to a recognized foreign terrorist organization in several countries. In order to do this, we're going to have to dive into the childhood of the leader of this cult, Shoko Asahara. Shoko Asahara was born under the name Chizuo Matsumoto. Matsumoto was brought up by a large poor family of tatami mat makers. He was born with a condition that caused him to lose sight in his left eye and partially blind in his life, which caused them to enroll in Kumamoto Prefectural School for the Blind. His parents had faith that he would be able to make something of himself despite his condition, but Shoko Asahara ruthlessly bullied other students and took their money. But at the same time, he became somewhat a leader of other children because he was the only one that could partially see. He wanted to attend medical school but wasn't accepted due to his impaired eyesight. He then aimed to enter law school but failed the entrance exam. As he grew up, he eventually graduated and studied acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. He also married a woman who birthed him 6 children. But in 1982, Matsumoto was arrested for selling fake Chinese medicines at a pharmacy without a license. He was fined $2,000 and given a brief jail sentence. He filed for bankruptcy and became even more obsessed with fortune-telling, yoga, Buddhism, and divination. Eventually, he asked himself, what am I living for? Is there anything absolute? Does true happiness really exist in this world? If so, can I get it? As his obsession with divination and religion grew, Matsumoto claimed to have been meditating on a beach in Kanagawa and that a god descended from the sky and said, I appoint you as the god of light who leads the armies of gods. A photograph was published of Matsumoto seated in lotus position levitating in the air. Along with this, he published a book claiming he could levitate, control weather, and had telekinesis. Not long after, Matsumoto went to visit the Dalai Lama and had a photo taken of them that he would later use in his books to make his work seem more legitimate. He started a religious group called Om Shinsen no Kai, which later got renamed to Om Shinrikyo, which translates into Supreme Truth. It was after this that he decided to change his name to Shoko Asahara. The reason for this name, he thought Asahara was a classier family name and Shoko was a word that means offering of incense. Asahara went to the government to apply his group as a legitimate religious organization. Authorities were reluctant at first, but eventually granted them the legal recognition, and Om Shinrikyo was born. Om Shinrikyo had beliefs that tied in bits of Buddhism, Hindu, and Christianity. They believed the end of the world was imminent and that they alone would survive. The followers were told that Japan would fall and there would be a nuclear war. There were also hints of murdering the emperor. Their belief was simple: accept Shoko Asahara and you would attain salvation. Asahara continued to publish books claiming many things. In his book titled Declaring Myself the Christ, well, the title becomes self-explanatory. He claimed to be the Lamb of God who could absorb bad karma of his followers. He would tell the people that if they rejected him, then they would be destined to be born as animals, hungry ghosts, and end up in different hells due to their bad karma. To become a part of any society, you have to go through an initiation, and in the case with Om Shinrikyo, Asahara was considered to be so pure that people would actually eat off of his plate, drink his dirty bathwater, touch his feet, and other things that would normally be deemed very unhealthy for a person to do. Some would even brew his hair in their tea. And you couldn't just walk in for free and go through this initiation. To become a member meant paying a hefty sum. One member claimed that he had paid $8,100 for the blood initiation that involved drinking Shoko Asahara's blood. The ironic thing about all of this was that the cult was taught to stray away from materialism. Some less disgusting initiations involved being put through physical and mental obstacles, such as immersion in hot baths and living underground for days at a time. It was found later that some people would actually die through this process and that the cult covered it up by secretly cremating their bodies. Now, after all of this has been said and done and you are officially in the cult, you get the privilege to listen to a tape like this for hours on end.
使用するぞ使用するぞ使用するぞ使用するぞ使用するぞ功徳を積むぞ功徳を積むぞ功徳を積むぞ功徳を積むぞ功徳を積むぞ瞑想するぞ瞑想するぞ瞑想するぞ瞑想するぞ瞑想するぞ今の苦しみは原因であるこの修行によって今の苦しみを打ち砕くことができる
You could also be one of the lucky members to wear this electrical cap that members believe to help synchronize your brainwaves with Asahara's. Aum Shinrikyo was growing in size and reputation within Japan.
少し持っててってください。落ち着いてますから。
どんな感じですか？
すごい幸せな気持ちですごい満足感があってで肉体とこう自分の意識とか違うところにあった感じがして
They had collected members of various skills. Many of them were students at elite universities, and normally this is rare, but the students signed up because of the pressure of being successful, and the cult promised them a more meaningful and stress-free life. But all of this was a disguise to recruit great minds to help aid the cult's popularity even further, while at the same time breaking their confidence. The cult even managed to get members in Japan's military forces. This was especially useful to Shoko Asahara for his plans later down the line. In the meantime, life was going good for Shoko Asahara. He was garnering fame and money from television, followers, and news outlets from all over. One report claimed them to have over 9,000 members in Japan and as many as 40,000 worldwide. The cult even created their own anime studio called MAT, which stood for Manga Anime Team. Anime was growing rapidly in Japan, so an anime called Shoatsu Sekai was produced with the intent of recruiting anime fans and otakus into their cult. It must have worked considering that there's about 272 of you that signed up according to my anime list.
空中を行く姿に空飛ぶ鳥のようでと
And while I'm on the topic of their anime, I should probably address a video game thought to be made by the cult themselves. The game was called The Story of Kamukushiki Village, where you play as Shoko Asahara himself. It caused a stir of reviews online in fear that anyone who played it was subjecting themselves to be brainwashed into joining the cult. Fortunately, this was never the case. It was purely satirical and created by a Japanese internet troll who wanted to take jabs at the cult. And to Japanese people playing, the way the story is read makes it actually very obvious this game is satirical. So if you ever see any YouTube videos telling you otherwise, know that it isn't true. Now back to the cult. Not everyone, of course, was a fan. As the cult grew, more and more people started disappearing. Some were killed in secret by the cult, and some were threatened to stay. Friends and families began protesting and concerned for their loved ones' whereabouts. Because of this growing outrage, a man by the name of Tatsumi Sakamoto stepped in. He was an anti-cult lawyer who sought out to rescue members of the cult and reunite them with their families. He had previous experience in bringing down cults before, and Aum Shinrikyo was next on his list. Sakamoto started organizing a campaign against the cult. He established what was called the Aum Shinrikyo Victims Association. In order to pursue a class action lawsuit against Asahara, he needed to get members to testify that they did not join the group voluntarily, and that they were lured in by deception and were being held against their will. Sakamoto knew that in order to bring down the cult, he had to destroy the image by debunking the cult's claims. One claim was that Shoko Asahara had divine power running through his blood, and somehow Sakamoto was able to convince the cult leader to submit to a blood test to prove that. After taking it, the results showed no sign of any supernatural phenomenon, and the evidence proved to be potentially damaging to Asahara. Soon after after that, the lawyer filmed an interview with a local news station in Tokyo about his doubt and efforts to expose the cult. This was it. All that needed to happen now was to air this interview and Asahara would be exposed to the world. Unfortunately, before the interview could air, someone from the news station showed the footage to the cult members, and the news station was pressured to cancel broadcasting it. Not long after, some of the cult members, including the chief scientist, got together to eliminate Sakamoto. They packed syringes filled with potassium chloride with the intent to knock out the lawyer and waited for him to come to the train station. But Sakamoto never showed up, so the members pursued Sakamoto in his own home. They found one of the doors unlocked and snuck in. When they walked into the bedroom, they found Sakamoto, his wife, and a 14-year-old month baby in the crib next to them. Sakamoto was smashed in the head with a hammer, and his wife was beaten, while another member injected the baby with the syringe filled with potassium chloride. They later injected it into the couple. The wife died quickly from the toxins, but Sakamoto not as much. So instead, the cult strangled him to death. Afterwards, their bodies were placed in metal drums, and the cult separated their bodies in 3 separate prefectures. They hoped that by doing this, the police wouldn't be able to make a link between their murders. Not only that, their teeth were smashed to warp their identity. Their bodies would not be found until the gas attack soon to come, 6 years later. Some believe that this was the cult's way of intimidating other lawyers from pursuing them, but even doing that didn't stop some lawyers from chasing after them. Others did begin challenging the cult. One journalist was able to uncover the disappearance of the Sakamoto family and was pursued, but she avoided being found. Another lawyer by the name of Toko Takimoto went in and debunked Shoko Asahara's book on levitation. After feeling humiliated by the lawyer, Shoko Asahara added Takimoto to the hit list and had an assassination attempted on him. Luckily, it was not successful and he was hospitalized, making a full recovery. Om Shinrikyo's true colors were beginning to unravel each passing day. Asahara continued to preach that the apocalypse was coming and no one outside the cult would be safe. He continued to use fear and manipulation on his followers. In 1990, Asahara decided to run in a House of Representatives election with 24 of his members. Despite their best efforts and overshooting their confidence, the cult only received a little over 1,700 votes and lost the election. This was thought to truly spur Asahara's hunger for power, which began his pursuit of overthrowing the Japanese government. So, he began a project. Asahara and his most loyal followers built a facility where they would begin experimenting with chemical weapons. The intent was to use these weapons against their enemies and put the cult on top. As they were testing out chemicals, a foul odor began coming out of the facility and disturbing the neighbors nearby. The fumes inhaled would cause symptoms such as nosebleeds and convulsions. When citizens protested in front of the facility, the cult blamed the US Army, saying the United States had released poison gas on the area. But residents all gathered together and provided hundreds of photos proving that the cult was responsible for the horrid smells and that they were up to no good. The evidence was removed, but the cult decided to move their facility to a sheep station.
Hold up. มึงลากสหรัฐเข้ามานี่แบบมึงแน่ใจแล้วเหรอเดี๋ยวปั๊ดก็เจอเดี๋ยวก็เจอฟรีดอมหรอกนี่ใช่เดี๋ยวนะตรงนี้มีไหมไม่มีเว้ยเฮ้ยตรงนี้เปิดประชุวิ่งมาได้โอเคดีอยู่โอ้ได้ทริปเยี่ยมพิวอันนี้ไม่มีอะไรที่ต้องการโอเคเดี๋ยวนะนี่ใช่ไหมชื่อ ได้อยู่เผลอเดินวนรอบกล่องแล้วกดไม่ได้ให้ตายเถอะไม่งั้นขายหน้าแย่ได้อะไรลืมไปไม่ใช่ต้องไม่พูดว่าได้อะไรดีเมื่อกี้มันจะสุ่มอันนี้โอเควิววิฟ3 อันเยี่ยมไปเลยยุบไปด่านต่อไปเลยแล้วกันเย้เวฟเฮนเดอร์โฟไอเทมที่ได้นี่ดีนะแต่ไม่ใช่ตอนนี้ดีบัฟยังไม่เยอะไม่ค่อยแบบอะไรส่งผลกับศัตรูเท่าไหร่ชิบโอเคดูต่อแล้วกัน
in Australia, which cost over $50 million to develop. Some truly question how lacking the security was over watching the cult. There was even a member who was fined for transporting the chemicals hidden in sake bottles. One of the members, who was a chemist, helped create the sarin gas that would be used in the cult's murders. Once the sarin gas was made, they decided to test it out. Before I move on, there's some things that you should know about sarin gas. Sarin is an odorless and colorless gas that has the power to kill quickly and painfully. Imagine the worst cramp you've ever had in your life. Now times that by 100, and instead of in one place, it's in every part of your body, including your eyes. Sarin causes your nervous system to go haywire by flexing every muscle in your body until you get painful cramps that are so extreme that it can even disrupt your diaphragm, preventing air going into your lungs. It's an extremely painful way to die, and anyone in contact with it is at risk of dying in just under 10 minutes. It's been classified as a weapon of mass destruction and is banned from use in modern warfare. No thanks to the chemists and military personnel that were involved in the cult, this is how they got their hands on the substance. Asahara ordered his first attack in an apartment block in Matsumoto Nagano Prefecture, Japan, where he sought out 3 judges living there. He was paranoid that these judges were out to rule against him in a lawsuit. Not to mention, Asahara was also angered by residents where over 140,000 signatures were signed in a petition against the cult's wishes to establish a facility in their city. It was a warm evening and most of the residents were leaving their windows open at night to let the fresh air come into their homes. But as they slept, the cult released the sarin gas in the neighborhood. 7 people died and hundreds were injured. One of the victims went into a coma for 14 years and died shortly after awakening. The police investigated the area and found dead fish, dogs, birds, and caterpillars surrounding the neighborhood. Despite tip-offs, the police did not link the attack to the cult. Little did anyone know that at the time, the Matsumoto gas attack was an experiment for the cult's biggest terrorist attack. Fingerprints from the Matsumoto gas attack linked one of the cult members to the case, and the police set out to raid the cult on March 22nd. But Asahara had friends in high places. 2 cult members just happened to be inside Japan's armed forces and warned Asahara that the police were coming in just a few days. So Asahara acted fast and ordered an attack on the Tokyo subway lines close to the police department. Some believe that this was a desperate attack on Asahara's part to begin the apocalypse. The attack was set to hit during rush hour at the absolute busiest part of the transport systems. It's March 20th, 1995 at about 8 a.m. Thousands of citizens board the trains during rush hour to go to work. Among them were 5 cult members that carried out Asahara's orders and split up to different trains on one of the busiest lines in Tokyo. Each of them is holding a plastic bag filled with liquid sarin wrapped in newspaper. They boarded the train and set the bags gently on the ground. As soon as the train would come to a stop, the cult members would stand up virtually at the same time as if to exit the train. They would use the tips of their umbrellas to puncture the bag, which leaked out the sarin. As the members exited the train, they would meet with an accomplice in a getaway car just outside the station and return to Ulm headquarters. As the cult members drove away, the liquid would quickly evaporate and spread within the train cars. The sarin liquid vaporizes and begins to spread its fumes throughout the train. Passengers began to inhale the deadly nerve gas and showed severe poisoning symptoms. People began coughing and looking around, and almost immediately they began convulsing convulsing with muscle spasms. Blood begins to pour from their noses and their mouths. The train is still running, making its stops, and incoming passengers come in contact with the sarin gas. Others that escaped the train fast enough still had difficulty breathing. After 3 stops, a passenger desperately hits the emergency button and the train is forced to make a stop. But the train found itself in the middle of a tunnel and was forced to continue to stop at the next station. The first call to the police is made. An announcement was made for everyone to please evacuate the station, and the passengers made a run for the exit. 13 passengers died from the sarin gas, while thousands more were injured. At first, everyone believed it was an explosion, but quickly the train line completely shut down in order to evacuate all commuters at Kasumigaseki Station. As staff members searched for the source of where the gas was coming from, 2 members died in the process. While others tried to mop up the liquid, they too fell ill from the exposure. It wasn't long until investigators connected the incident to the cult. I took a trip to Kasumigaseki Station, and it was here that the train stopped to evacuate all of its passengers. Staff members were scrambling around to locate and dispose of all of the sarin bags. It's also at the station that every year a memorial is held to remember all of the victims. And as of March 20th, 2021, the station held its 26th anniversary memorial. From what I had researched online, it seems that the sarin bags were put into the train rather than in trash cans. But because of fears of another attack in the future, the government removed all of its trash cans because it was seen as a potential hiding spot for sarin bags. Before I continue on, I want to discuss the victims and shed a light on just how much this incident changed Japan. I feel sometimes exposures are almost completely given to the criminal and almost never to the victims and people affected. Whether it's just human nature for us to look at a car crash we can't look away from, or the media just doesn't care enough to talk about the victims, I decided to shed a light on it after reading Haruki Murakami's book Underground. This book was completely dedicated to focusing on the lives of the victims through the interviews and first-hand experiences. It was like I'd been shot or something. All of a sudden, my breathing completely stopped. Like if I inhaled any more, all my guts would come spilling right out of my mouth. I was walking back to the office to my replacement when the chief officer Matsumoto came out with a mop. We head up the escalator to the platform. There we found Toyoda, Takahashi, and Hishinuma with a bundle of wet newspapers on the platform. They're stuffing it all by hand into plastic bags, but there's liquid coming from them and spilling into the platform. There was a very strong smell. Then Takahashi walked over to the trash can at the end of the platform, probably to fetch some more newspaper to wipe up where it was still wet. Suddenly he sinks down in front of the bin and keels over. Takahashi's face looked awful. He couldn't talk. We laid him on his side, loosened his tie, and he looked in really bad shape. The news had broken out, and the police headed to Ohm headquarters. Shoko Asahara was found hiding in a concealed room. He was sweaty and seemed to have intended to stay in hiding for some time. But once he was brought into questioning, he denied the allegations and said that he couldn't possibly have done it because he was a blind man. His followers denied it as well and said that it was a separate plan made by other cult members instead. After further interrogation of the cult members responsible, they all said they legitimately thought what they were doing was right.
Many Japanese is guilty and he must be punished by death, and so judge will think same way.
While members may have confessed, Shoko Asahara stayed silent. He went through an 8-year trial and attended over 256 court sessions and never once offered an apology nor explanation. Instead, he reportedly developed a mental illness where he babbled nonsense in broken English and talked incoherently. It wasn't uncommon that people thought he was just trying to receive the insanity plea. His lawyer, however, had made a statement. "
命令だとか指示だとかしてない。殺害の指示はしていないと。単なる殺人ではなくして、嘱託殺人で自分は死にたいので自分を殺してくれということを。
本日朝原死刑囚をはじめとするオウム事件の死刑囚の執行が行われました。
Ashoka Asahara and his followers were all sentenced on death row. After the attack and trial, the cult members responsible for killing Sakamoto-san and his family had finally revealed the location of their bodies.
警視庁と神奈川県警の合同捜査本部は今日夕方、辰彦ちゃんと思われる遺体は今日夕方これまで捜索していた10メートル四方の地域に隣接する東側で発見されました。この地域は今日から捜索範囲を広げた部分で横から壁を削るように掘っていたところ。
โอเคถึงสกายเมโดแล้วก็ลองไลฟ์ติดอะไรเปล่าวะน่าจะถ้าตอนลงไลฟ์นี่น่าจะอะไรน่าจะติดอยู่มั้งเปิดเสียงเพลงให้เต็มเสียงเพลงเกมให้เต็มเลยกันชึบเรียบร้อยมาเงี้ยวฟังไว้แค่นี้พอมีวาร์ปไม่แล้วแหละโอ้ได้โดดไกลอีกแล้วได้เหรียญต่อเลยชิบเอาอะไรดีขอดาเมจเพิ่มโอ้กิโยตินดีอยู่ได้ปาแม่งผมไม่ป้องแป้งไม่เดินมาไกลเกินที่มันไม่ปิ้งตรงมันไม่เด้งเสียใจอยู่เยอะใช่ของอะไร ได้อะไรอ๋อได้ไอ้อะไรที่ดูไอ้ของมอนชั่วคราวเป็นไงวิ่งได้เขียวได้โอเคอยู่โอเคพอไล่เดี๋ยวนะไอ้อะไรได้กูขอโทษเลยอะไรเนี่ย Receive Fat Healing when Attack อ๋อ When Attack นี่คือถูกโจมไม่ใช่จดบาซ่ามีอะไรบ้างอะไรขึ้นโอ้ไม่นะคุณโฮลิเล่นโดกิขอให้โชคดีแต่คิดว่านะคงน่าจะรู้อยู่แล้วแหละมั้งนะชิปคอฟบลูมอันนี้ของเขาดีโอเคกันไปบวกบอสวัดกด E ไปแล้วใช่ไหมโอเควัดไปเอาเดี๋ยวเอาได้มาต่อเลยแล้วถ้างั้นหมายความว่าถ้าเกิดต่อให้อะไรเข้าประตูวัดเมื่อกี้ถ้าประตูวัดเมื่อกี้จะไปเจอห้องบอสแต่ว่าตีไอ้อะไรเลือกที่จะเข้าไอ้อะไรบาซ่าก็ถือว่าเป็นเข้าด่านปกติแล้วแบบก็ต้องมาลุยต่อใช่ไหมเนี่ยเป็นจังที่เองวิบัติระดับหมอลำถึงโดดโคตรไกลย่อยเลยดึงแวบลดแรงจีอันนี้ระเบิดมันดีที่ เดี๋ยวคิดเฮ้ยกดตังค์ไม่พอกดตังค์มันก็ไม่พอแปะโอ้โหเสียงแม่งแบบรู้สึกฟินได้ยินเสียงแปะแล้วเว้ยมันยังสนอหูเลยแกอันนี้ได้มีไฟล์อีกอันวัดเพื่ออะไรชิบเดี๋ยวนะเก็บเย้ยเกือบแดดหมดพอดีเกือบรวมออฟตูอยู่ตรงนี้โอเคโอ้ได้ไตทิปเยี่ยมเก็บดูซิแถวนี้มีอะไรให้เก็บไหมให้มีแล้วมีทุกควีนยิงล้วนๆเย้ยตีถาดไฟแล้วต้องใช้ให้คุ้มเดินใต้ท้องมนเรียบร้อยด่านต่อไปมันหัวเราะใส่กูแล้วโอเคเฮ้ยยิงไปไอ้นี่มันยิงแม่นซะด้วยไวขึ้นอีกดอมฉันต้องการสปีดมากกว่านี้อีกเยี่ยมได้สปีดเพิ่มอีกแล้วดอมเร็วกว่านี้อีกนึกว่ากล่องตายเถอะซากมอนเอาเลยดีตรงนี้แล้วกันเขาเรียกว่าอะไรหินวัดระยะใจโอ้มีมอนติดอย่างนั้นเลยอันนี้อะไรวะกิโยตินเดี๋ยวเยอะไป โมสปีดมีกล่องตรงไหนให้เปิดอีกบ้างนี่ทวิงแก๊สโซลีนโอเคไปด่านต่อไปเดี๋ยวดิ วาร์ปไม่มีเว้ยดึงเยอะเรื่อยๆเดี๋ยวก่อนนะสักครู่นึงโอเคมากลับมาต่อเอฟเฟกต์อลังการงานสร้างประตูวาร์ปมาครับเดเนโปต้าโอ้ดู ไปตีบอสเราจะไปกระทืบบอสเอาไม่ยังไม่ใช่บอสอีกเหรอวะลืมนับด้วยเย้ยการกระทำของเจ้าอยู่นี้เยอะนี่มันเปิดขอบแม่กองฟุ่มยอดกองฟุ่มกระทะโลกใหญ่ดีได้ดอกไม้ไฟแวบๆตาฝาดไอ้แรกไข่สปอนบอสอยู่ไหนไข่สปอนไอ้บอสประจำแมปเฮ้ยนิกซายลบแบบดิจิตอลข้างในนี้มีไหมไม่มีไม่มีใครให้กดฉันต้องการตีไข่อยู่ไหนใครเห็นไข่บ้างจุดดึงเฮ้ยยังไงไข่เรียบร้อยมาโซไอ้ดารามีชื่อกระนำครับกระนำยิงเราจะกระนำยิงดอกไอเทมแดงได้ไอเทมแดงเลยนี่มันแค่ที่ฮิวโอเคตรงนี้หมดแล้วมั้ง เคไปอู้เย้เยี่ยมได้เลยเจนิฟไม่ใช่เอ็มตีคออ๋อยิ่งมีอะไรเยอะยิ่งอะไรอะยิ่งแข็งแกร่งขึ้นมันปลดล็อกด่านพิเศษเสียเวลาอีกแล้วก็ปั๊มมันในการลุยบอสด้านสุดท้ายแข็งเกือบตายโยเกือบไปดึงจะกดอะไรเบอร์เซอร์เกอร์ได้ฟูเอลเชลฟูเอลเฟลบ้าอะไรGet me out of here ยืด ช่ไหมแว่นปิ๊กแล้วที่คุณอยู่ที่ตัวพอแน่นเฮ้ยมีของเดอะไวท์แป๊บหนึ่งนี่แล้วกันชาวไฟระเบิดบุ้มบ้ามขอดูว่าเฮ้ย Challenge of the Mountain ตายยังไงได้แบนเดเลียอีเร็วรุ่นเยอะดันกดกล่องทันอยู่ด้วยนะให้ตายขึ้นเดี๋ยวนะเยอะประตูอยู่ไหนเราต้องการประตูฝุ่มจุดเพิ่มดาเมจเหลือแต่รวดเร็ว ดูดเลือดเพื่อนเฮ้ยจบคีรีเดี๋ยวนะทางอยู่ไหนวะทางนี้ใช่ไหมเฮ้ยโคตรไวเดี๋ยวเวลาแล้วชวิงโอเคโอเคครับทุกคนวันนี้ก็จะไปแต่เพลงเท่านี้ครับใครอยู่ดูจนถึงตอนนี้นี่ก็อย่าลืมฝากกดไลค์ Subscribe แชร์ครับแล้วก็อย่าลืมกดกระดิ่งกันด้วยล่ะวันนี้ผม Virtuoso Gamer ขอลาไปก่อนสวัสดีครับ